Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, November 15th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Northwestern game is in 1 day. The game against Michigan in 15 days. Today we're welcoming back Ross Fulton, one of the X's and O's gurus at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And when we have Ross on the show, we are proudly sponsored by Jeff Ruby's Steakhouse, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. All right, so today we're talking about the Ohio State defense, and the Ohio State defense has been on a little bit of a journey since the Oregon game. It felt like after that game, Ryan Day and Jim Knowles and pretty much everyone else in the building recognized, okay, some things need to change, and they have kind of continued to make changes every week. You see some new stuff, you see some different stuff every week. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work as well. Today we're going to be breaking down 3 different plays that kind of showcase all of that. And Ross, we're going to start with, yes, it has finally happened. The Jack has arrived at Ohio State. Did it work? Maybe. But definitely a big change. 3 down instead of 4 down on that defensive front. And the long-awaited arrival of the Jack.
Yeah, I would say as a general matter, since the Oregon game, Ohio State has used more disguise, right? They've used more variety, both in the pass rush and in coverage. And they're doing a better job of matching routes or carrying routes or, covering guys in the secondary in different coverages rather than sort of staying in spots, right, as spot dropping. So those are like the big 3 things as a general matter. Then we get to the 3rd series of Purdue and they pull out the odd front with the Jack. I joked that it's sort of like a troll on everyone who's been focused on this for years, that they decided that we're going to run this and do it as simplistically and poorly as possible as a joke on everyone. But they did, in fact, do it as simply as possible. And so the reason I say that, so like we can see this play, right? And on Mitchell Melton, who is in the Jack role, he starts out lined up between the guard and the tackle in the B gap. And part of the reason that Jim Knowles liked the use of this Jack concept at Oklahoma State was that he could float this play around to cancel out inside gaps like this, to change it up for the offense in terms of their blocking schemes, not knowing exactly who they're going to block pre-snap. It also allowed them to cancel out gaps, to do more of the 3-high stuff in the secondary. And so we do have an odd front here, right? So Cade McDonald's lined up head over the nose. But then Mitchell Melton jumps outside. So this is the only way they used the Jack on Saturday. So there was none of this sort of moving him around. They gave the hint of it. But he inevitably, and then after he got hurt, CJ Hicks at that role, came outside and rushed wide off the D gap. And so this is just a simple split wide zone. The problem being that they continue to have is they were not fitting the gaps correctly. Because of just jumping him outside the Jack, or just the lack of familiarity with it. They, when I joke about on the one hand, we're going to run it, on the other hand, we're going to do it as poorly as possible. That certainly contributed to by having a large group of backups in, including CJ Hicks here at will linebacker, who, apparently himself post-game, even he announced that he shouldn't be playing linebacker since he said he should be an edge player. So they're playing him at will linebacker here. Inside zone, you can see like at the snap, Hicks points to Cody Simon that the tight end's blocking back, and so that the linebacker should fall back. There's a couple ways you can handle split zone action like this, right? Because you're moving a blocker from one side to the other. And so that changes the gaps, right? It pushes them all back. And so one way to handle that is you have the linebackers each fall back a gap. The problem here is they don't seem to have all the gaps covered as a result of that. Like if you can watch it, Mitchell Melton has outside the tackle or the D gap. Caden Curry has outside the guard or the C gap. It seems like CJ Hicks has the B gap then, but he falls back to play the A gap, and Cody Simon falls back even more. But the problem is you now have they're running like a cover 1 here. You can see like Latham Ransom roll back, and Caleb Downs is coming down to the weak side. So they now have 4 guys to the left of the center from behind the line of scrimmage, so to the defense's right. and only 3 guys to the right of the line of scrimmage, but there's 4 gaps over there. And so, CJ Hicks catches the offensive guard 4 yards back off the line of scrimmage. But he is now seemingly responsible for both the B gap between the guard and the tackle and the A gap between the guard and the center, because the Caden McDonald is playing to the backside from, he's not actually 2-gapping that. He's just playing the backside A gap. So this just continued to seem to happen. They didn't seem to have it fit very well. And this obviously contributed to some of the issues with it. Like, it didn't help that, one play, Cody Simon, who is your starting middle linebacker, could have made the tackle in the hole. He missed the tackle. CJ Hicks from the aforementioned edge came unblocked one time and missed the quarterback. So there were some execution issues as well. But hopefully they don't, throw it out. And it doesn't seem like, I didn't take Ryan Day's comments either post game or after the game or on Tuesday, I should say, to indicate that they would never use it again. As I said, they may have put it out there as simply as possible so that teams have a scheme for it going forward. And then maybe you do move the jack around to sort of plug some of those interior gaps in a game of greater magnitude.
One of the other changes that we've seen somewhat consistently since that Oregon game is they're increasing the amount of pressure they're bringing in. It feels like they're increasing the different ways in which they're bringing that pressure. One of the things they did on Saturday against Purdue was this was a line stunt. This is Jack Stoyer kind of looping around and going inside. And this was the play that they talked about on the broadcast where Sonny Styles is the first guy through. And his job is basically to block the offensive lineman, which is kind of a change of how you typically think of that dynamic. But he kind of blocked those linemen and opened a lane for Jack Sawyer on this one.
Yeah, this play captures both. We're talking about more variety out of the defense as well as carrying routes more in the secondary. And so we've talked about this a few times post Oregon, when they're obviously using more and different types of pressure. But as I said last week, I think they're also being more purposeful about it. So you're seeing a lot of this where you're basically using one rusher to essentially sacrifice himself to get picked up by an offensive lineman so that a teammate can come free. And so that's what you get here with both linebackers, actually. So you get Sonny Styles is going to pick off the guard, right? Or engage. So that guard is accounting for him. Cody Simon's then going to pick off the tackle, and that allows Sawyer to loop around inside. Now, in theory, they have a running back to that side, but obviously that running back's expecting that he's going to pick up the linebacker blitzing. And so you've basically Purdue has 3 blockers for 2 linebackers and Sawyer coming untouched. And again, this is as we've talked about repeatedly, this is how you help create pressure. No one can just create pressure by just rushing 4 guys in the same spots. And that's exactly what Nick Saban was referring to as antiquated. And so you're seeing that go away. And obviously the focus here, right, is this is a man coverage, but even still you're dropping JT Tuimoloau as the opposite defensive end out as sort of an underneath player, both as a rat in the hole / they're doing this a lot too, to probably handle some of the quarterback scrambling issues where they have a defensive lineman who's sort of, I guess, floating around near the line of scrimmage, for lack of a better word, to sort of spy the quarterback. Because the pressure scheme's really designed to get Sawyer free here. And so there's less concern about just rushing 4 guys and more about we're going to target a particular way. The other thing I want to point out here too is in the back end of the secondary. As I said, they're doing a much better job of matching routes and carrying routes. And that is even on cover 1 too. One of the things we discussed post Oregon was the way Ohio State was playing man coverage. It was I've got this guy no matter where he goes. And that created all sorts of problems we've seen to them, with offenses using pick routes against them or offenses trading off so that puts a person in conflict so that they have to both defend that player as well as have a run gap at fit. And so one thing I noticed on Saturday is even with a heavy amount of cover 1, they were playing against Purdue, pretty basic. They were doing a nice job of trading off routes in the secondary. So you'll see this guy coming in this inside motion here and run a deep over route. And the whole goal of that is to pick players, right? Because in theory, he starts out as the wide defender or wide receiver, number 1 to the outside. And which Jermaine Matthews here would be responsible for. And he then becomes the inside defender, right? So the first thing they do is rather than try to have Matthews fight through the traffic, they trade off receivers. So now Caleb Downs has that deep over, but then they even go further than that. And once he crosses to the other side of the field, Jordan Hancock, who is the deep cover one safety here, picks him up and Downs falls back as the cover one safety. So saw this several times on Saturday, trading off routes. And I think that goes to, Day kind of mentioned that, like, less concern about getting the perfect matchup, more concern about it. He used the term, I think, like getting the cleats in the ground and being ready to play. And so I think that's an example there, right? Like, you're less worried about, like, well, we've got our safety now on this receiver as opposed to our corner, and more like this matchup creates better leverage for us. We can trade routes off and we're in a better position to play.
All right. And the third and final play we're going to be talking about today seems like it's going to be a very similar theme to the last one. You got pressure. We're going to be talking about the coverage on the back end. So let's just roll right into that one.
Yeah, well, I always enjoy talking about trap two when they run it. They ran it twice Saturday. This play that led to a fourth down sack after the Edric Houston personal foul kept the drive alive at the first half. And then the second one was almost an interception. So both times, again, we've talked about this trap two concept, right, where you're bringing pressure from the field. Here you have both Jordan Hancock as a nickel and Cody Simon blitzing into the B and C gaps on each side of the guard, right? So you're overloading one side with pressure, and then you're dropping, though, to the other side. So JT TomOrrow, again, is dropping into the flat. So he's the cover two defender, right? So you're playing a 2 deep, 4 under still instead of a 2 deep, 5 under. So you're still using a zone pressure. But what you do is the reason it's, trap two, you have basically a hole player here in Latham Ranson. So, like, what looks like your other deep safety, he actually comes down to play to the side you're blitzing, and he's going to pick up this over route as like sort of the whole defender. So then you have the other deep cover two player actually becomes the cornerback, Davison Ignos, to that side. And as I said, like JT TomOrrow. So you're sort of rolling the coverage again with the concept that, like, quarterbacks like to often throw to the side where the blitz is coming, thinking that you're down numbers to that side. So you're trapping them into that. But the other thing I just want to point out is, like, you can notice here, like, how much better Ohio State is matching routes. Again, I keep talking about that. So, like, even to the boundary side, right? Like, JT TomOrrow, he's not just, like, sort of dropping into the flat and just standing there, right? Like, he's actually covering that tight end, running all the way to the flat there. Sonny Styles, who is like the hook curl defender to that side, he is carrying vertically that corner route until Ignos picks him up as a deep half safety there. Ranson, obviously, like in this concept, is picking up that over route. Caleb Downs is matching that deep dig. So I know this seems like a small thing, but there were countless times, like you and I discussed, where, quarterbacks would eventually, like, hit a backside dig route against them, whether it be Iowa or whatever else, because eventually, like, when you're just sitting statically in coverage, guys can come open. And it's just making a very large impact on making it difficult for quarterbacks, which is making them hold the ball longer, which is increasing the ability of these pressures to get home. So it's a pretty big sea change in terms of how they're handling, whether both man coverage, like we talked about the previous example, or zone coverage in terms of, using frankly, like, more man principles within zone coverage, and then in man coverage using some of these zone principles to trade off receivers when they go out of an area, or you have better leverage, with the zone player picking them up and then someone rolling back. And so that's just really helping them in the back end.
All right. And so just a real quick look ahead to this weekend's game at Northwestern. It feels like we've spent a lot of time talking about, hey, they're playing at Wrigley Field, and not a ton about Northwestern. The Wildcats, 104th in FEI in offense this year, 37th in defense. So I don't know if there's a side of the ball that is more interesting to talk about. Maybe it's the Ohio State offense going up against what could be a little bit of a challenging defense. We've talked about a lot of the different stuff they've been doing, just even the stuff that we've just talked about this week on these two shows. Is there anything that you think you're going to see, like, further iteration, or you're going to see more of this, but not necessarily see, other stuff? What are you looking for on Saturday against the Wildcats?
Yeah, I mean, I think defensively, to start there, I'd say probably more of the same. I mean, obviously, the big ramp up for the defense comes with Indiana, and the amount of RPOs that Indiana uses, right? And so One thing Michigan had a success against Indiana in the second half, using a lot of man coverage to cancel out RPOs. Like we've talked about that, like in theory, right? That if you cover everyone up, you're not going to pull the ball. Obviously that was, I would say, Ohio State's game plan against Oregon. The problems came then, as we just discussed, trading off receivers or someone who would also have a run gap, having to follow a receiver. And so I'm interested to see if they continue down this path of it within man coverage, being able to better trade off receivers to prepare for that RPO heavy. But yeah, I do think offensively, you're just going to get certainly a better challenge than Purdue presented. Yes, the Nebraska or Northwestern is sort of that they're often seen Big Ten team that has a really poor offense and a pretty decent to good defense. And so, I think that this is an opportunity to keep building. I continue to say, obviously people are again focused on Ohio State being able to throw the football vertically. I just would like to see them, come out with a strong start, particularly in the run game, and be able to hopefully get the ball spread around early and often, and get Emeka Egbuka in particular back involved with the passing game.
All right. Well, we will see whether that happens on Saturday. Should be a fun day out at Wrigley Field. Can be a really unique and fun kind of venue. Should be a fun game to watch, even on TV, I would think. And then once that's done, then you head back into the deep end of the pool next week. Indiana, Michigan, and then potentially a Big Ten championship game and much more. So this would probably be the last one that you go into the game thinking all season long, oh boy, well, they certainly have this one well under control. Nothing could possibly go wrong. So enjoy the last Saturday of nice, easy, relaxing football before we head back into the deep end of the pool next week. So we'll have Ross back next week to talk about what we saw against Northwestern and probably give a little look ahead to that Indiana game. And of course, when he's on, we will be once again sponsored by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.